So about 20 some odd years ago, a group of experts came together to try and make one definitive statement of how we can define intelligence. And what they came up with was, intelligence is the ability to direct one's thinking, adapt to one's circumstances, and learn from one's experiences. Now that we have kind of an interesting understanding of what intelligence is and what it's not, as in it's not an explicitly concrete concept, now we can actually begin to look at Molyneux, his claims, and some of the things that I find are very, very troubling and the reason why I'm making this video to counter him. Now, something that always makes Stefan Molyneux really, really fascinating to me is how almost hypnotic he can be and how cleverly he conducts himself when he's doing his show, Free Domain Radio. You see, he might have some really, really caustic ideas on what it means to analytically and realistically look at race and statistics, but he only says very specific things in very specific videos and never all of them at the same time. And because he puts out so much content at a very rapid pace, it's really easy to catch one of his shows, hear him say something, and be like, well, it sounds like a hard truth, but you know, he's just trying to be honest. And for the most part, I would agree with most people who see it in that light. But the problem is when you start putting them all together and you start piecing together this ideology that Molyneux has started to adopt and has started to try and teach people, it paints something a little bit more nefarious. And so to start this off, we're gonna start listening to him talking about biodiversity and the different behaviors with different racial demographics. And as you'll see, he fully believes that this is a biologically programmed component. So
either they're going to bring their wives, in which case they're going to start breeding, or, and this is true of third world cultures as a whole. Low IQ cultures, you know, you could argue that there are selected, as we've talked about in Gene Wars. They just have kids and 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 have kids.
So what he's talking about in this instance, he's talking about immigrants, specifically in this context, immigrants from other places into Europe. And if you listen carefully, you can actually hear that he's talking about a biological element that compels these people, which he will call low IQ people, to just breed exponentially.
And that's the nature of the beast. This is one of the reasons why the countries remain poor. I mean, other than the IQ, it's a signal they just breed like crazy.
So it's not only just because they have low IQs, but it's also because they breed like crazy, which is inferring that intelligence is entirely heritable. Keep that in mind as we keep watching.
No resources, not enough to go around. So either they bring their wives or they don't bring their wives, in which case you have a lot of unattached young men with no jobs, no family prospects, no dating prospects. What happens then?
It's definitely a recipe for disaster.
Oh, absolutely. It is. And this is what I've been saying. You know, we started doing IQ years ago. And it's hard for people to grasp. It's hard for people to grasp. You know, human biodiversity is a challenging topic.
And there you go. He's talking about biodiversity, which means there is a biological component to the people espousing this type of behavior.
It's challenging on the left, because everybody's supposed to be shaped by economic forces and everyone's supposed to be this clay that you can mold into whatever you want. So the left doesn't like the fact that there seem to be hard limits to abilities between ethnic groups. And the right doesn't like it because they tend to be more religious and everyone's made in the image of God. So both the left and the right reject the human biodiversity that comes from 50 to 60 to 70,000 years in wildly disparate environments, which is exactly the kind of evolution that you would expect.
Now, there is a little bit something to be said about that. You know, when we talk about early human history and the spread of humanity across the planet, it's true that there has been some genetic differences. Absolutely. And that's not to say that there can't be a component, somewhat, to certain aspects of brain function that the IQ test can test for. However, the broad sweeping generalizations that Molyneux makes about intelligence and he does, are inaccurate and reaching.
So you have this weird unity between the left and the right to reject human biodiversity, differences in strengths and weaknesses, abilities and limitations between races or ethnicities. It's one of these weird ways in which both the left and the right completely agree for vastly different reasons.
And that's kind of the problem too, is he's talking about this politically. And this isn't a politics issue, this is a science issue. This is something left up to psychology and neuroscience and genetics. These are the things that determine and dictate what these things are going to be, what the factors that can be to contribute towards it. That it becomes a political issue for him is very telling about what his motivations in determining this data actually is. He can say he's trying to be objective, but just wait. This next clip comes from when he talked to Linda Gottfredson, who is actually a known eugenicist. Just putting that out there.
And this is something that, again, is well known within the professional literature and professional periodicals and so on, which is simply not making it out for a variety of reasons we could discuss, that there is a hierarchy that is currently recognized, and I think you gathered together a list of 50 or so experts who repeated all of this stuff ad infinitum, still, again, not making it into general culture as a whole, which is that there is, you could roughly equate a sort of 5-part split or divergence among IQs for particular groups.
Divergence. Now remember the word divergence, because he uses that word a lot, and it can have a certain type of meaning, but can also mean things that he's not actually intending, because he doesn't bring up all of the relevant intricacies of this scientific topic, and we'll be getting into those.
With, I think as Charles Murray pointed out, Ashkenazi Jews sort of at the top, 110, 115, and if you just focus on verbal, 120 plus.
Yeah, these are the averages where the middle pack falls.
Right. And then I've heard a variety for Asians, 103, 106, and so on, but very strong in visual spatial. You know, the sort of myth of the stereotype of the Asian engineer versus the Jewish engineer. Ashkenazi Jews actually score a little bit below. Yeah, they score a little bit below the norm in visual spatial, but of course, in terms of language skills, they're through the roof, which is why you see a lot of writers and directors and so on.
So one of the interesting traps that comes from talking about it in the way that Stefan does is that these basis for IQ testing and this overall theory that is produced by people who hold a very strong racial component to the IQ test is that these types of things are completely concrete, and that and as we will see, he believes them to be predominantly genetic, which is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. The testing that they're going to be talking about is IQ testing that was done across the globe in certain geographical areas. Now, the notion that you can go to a war-torn, trashed up, West African nation like Liberia and IQ test them and put them against the IQ test of a formally educated Tokyo student, and that somehow that IQ test has no environmental factors whatsoever, or it's a very small minority, is such a preposterous fucking idea. It's insane to me. One interesting thing to point out is Jews. So he lists Ashkenazi Jews and East Asians as high up on this hierarchy that he likes to cite. Well, there's a little bit of a problem, because he's going to bring up basically what our immigration policy in the US used to be and what it was based on, but he doesn't actually mention what it was based on to begin with. And we've actually covered it in just, what we were talking about before. And that, in this way, Henry Goddard, one of the guys who was the architect for the basis of our immigration policy, discriminated against Jews, claiming that they had extremely low intelligence and so they should be in some way segregated from the rest of the population. But somehow that doesn't actually really matter in his coherent arguments.
And so you've got Ashkenazi Jews, and then you have Asians, and then you have whites who are normed, Caucasians normed around 100. And then, if I remember the numbers rightly, sort of low 90s for Hispanics, and then 85, which is a full standard deviation below whites for blacks.
A full standard deviation.
And these differences have persisted for I think as long as the tests have been going on. And the more G-loaded the tests are, the more they're trying to measure general intelligence, which is directly associated with physical structures in the brain we can get into.
Now, this is the very first instance I have where Stefan equates the IQ test to actual intelligence. Now, it's not the only one, and he does it actually fairly commonly, but he slips it in as just a, well, IQ means intelligence. IQ means intelligence. By and large, the scientific community has rejected the idea that outright the IQ test can give an overall sweeping proclamation about all areas of human intelligence. Instead, that there are multifaceted factors to be taken into account, let alone the notion that for some reason your intelligence can actually dictate what your benefit to society actually is, or your societal value. See, there's something interesting we have to talk about when we're talking about standard deviation. You see, the social economical status of people who are being tested for their IQ. Now, if you were to take the lowest of the low of poor children raised in poor families to the wealthiest in wealthy families, the deviation can be anywhere from 12 to 17 points. Yet, for some reason, no. It's all genetic. And so when we're comparing these people from largely different cultures, largely different economic status, largely different religious groups or methodologies, the reason is genetics. It's just genetics. That's the main reason. That's why we're lumping things in by racial percentages, even though the fact that when they actually look at this statistical data, they're talking about racial groups in racially specific areas. And then one other thing that I'd like to mention before we continue with Stefan is it has been shown, there has been data that lends towards a belief that African American students who are going in to take their IQ test, who report being extremely anxious about the test, score lower than their classmates of the same racial group, same economic status, same environment, same city, same school. What this suggests too is that the IQ test can also be based on performance, and things that can affect your performance, such as anxiety, pressure from your family, pressure from any number of different factors, can highly and drastically change the number that you might score. And this is obviously relevant too, because when you have people who take the test under certain types of duress or at ease, they score wildly different with the same fucking person.
First of all, America from 1925 until 1965 had a virtual moratorium on immigration.
And the reason that was done was because of bullshit data put forth by some of the people who first instituted the idea of racially charged intelligence scores. And the people that were generally left out were Southern Europeans, such as Italians and Hungarians and Jews. But if you listen to him, it sounds like this was a paradise before we fucked everything up by changing our basis for immigration code away from something that was charged with a racially perceived notion of intelligence.
And, by the way, it was in fact one of the more prosperous times, if not the most prosperous times, in American history.
See?
Screaming racism at people because blacks are collectively less intelligent, screaming racism at people because Asians are collectively shorter is insane.
And you see what he just did there? See, he says really quickly, because blacks are less intelligent, and because Asians are shorter. So if you agree that Asians are shorter, then you have to agree that blacks are less intelligent? I'm sorry, but no. That you brushing through that kind of thing, this almost hypnotic methodology, this musical way of speaking to just interject these things does not actually make them accurate or true.
People could say it's either environmental or it's genetic or it's a combination of the two. From what I understand, it's about a combination of the two, and there are estimates that range between 40 and 60% of IQ is genetic.
Now remember this, between 40 and 60%. Now, I have my own opinions on this as well, and from the literature that I read and my familiarity with genetics, because I am in school for human biology and I do study these things, I will say that the jury is still out. The jury is still out, but it has an effect, most likely. If not necessarily in determining what your intelligence capacity is, but maybe perhaps your aptitudes towards certain types of skills or certain types of reasoning abilities, spatial perception, mathematics, that sort of thing.
If you look around the world, cross-national differences in the rate of violent crime, murder, rape, and serious assault, significantly correlated to a country's IQ scores. So the higher the IQ of a country in general, the lower the rate of crime. High IQ is a very precious resource in society.
High IQ is a very precious resource in society. Okay, that's kind of interesting. Well, the thing is that making such broad sweeping statements is not necessarily inherently true. The basis of a country is not just simply on its thinkers and its innovators, our scientists, our engineers, these types of things. It's also dependent on the hard-working labor of any country, the populace that helps make the country itself go. How can you put the value of a human being based upon their intelligence score? Something that is so nebulous and easily misinterpreted that science itself does not want to make any absolute determinations on. You see, there's a really big problem with this. Alfred Binet said that poverty is the enemy of intelligence, and for the most part that's really true. We see in statistical data that more poor areas tend to have lower IQ scores, which would also lend that environment and setting has a huge factor in it. The other thing that we also understand, and we understand it quite succinctly, is that poverty also breeds crime. But this doesn't actually make any difference to Stefan Molyneux's argument. Instead, it's just simply a matter of, well, their genetic code because of their race means that they're going to be more violent because they're dumber. Maybe I am reading a little bit too much into it. Maybe, and I will accept that. But from what he has, in this instance, portrayed to me, in his talking points, that is exactly what he means. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm wrong, it's because he does not communicate that accurately.
The high IQ people tend to be more mentally healthy, more sociable. They tend to have longer lasting and more stable marriages. They tend to be better parents. They tend to just be more richer, of course. They generally tend to do better in society. So this is a significant value in society.
Again, a significant value in society. Your value in society can be measured by your IQ score. It's not that he says you can't have value in society with a low IQ score, but he's using it as a metric to judge people.
And we had Jason Richwine on the show who was talking about the study that he did at Harvard, where he was pointing out that Hispanics come in with significantly lower IQs than Asians, Ashkenazi Jews, or whites, and that this lower IQ persists over several generations, which would seem to indicate that there's a strong genetic component. Genetics often considered to be between sort of 50 to 60 to 80% of one's final IQ.
At first it was 40 to 60%, now it's 50, 60, 80%. Again, keep this in mind while you keep watching. So I think this way I've actually given you some understanding on the complexities, the problems with Molyneux's views on IQ and as it relates to race. Now, it gets a little bit darker than just that. You see, Molyneux isn't just interested in race, he's also interested in politics. And his view on politics and how he views his political opponents is honestly terrifying. What we're gonna watch right now is a young man talking to Molyneux about how he has fears about another Islamic terrorist attack on American soil, and how he feels like it is his duty as an American to try and protect everyone, even those that might disagree with him and his particular types of ideology.
But I just cannot shake that feeling that if the situation arises where I am somewhere where I should not be hearing gunshots, and I hear them, I cannot be the one who runs away. I can't.
Why?
I can't do it. Because that's
Why?
what pussies do, damn it. And real American men who are armed and ready and trained, they're not pussies, okay? We've done a lot to make sure.
Okay. No, I get it.
Okay,
I get it,
sorry.
G.I. Joe.
I get it, G.I. Joe.
But let me give you a pushback here
right.
and see if this makes any sense, all right? Who are you going to be saving?
My fellow Americans, that's who I'm going to be saving. Whether I agree with them
you
or
were
not.
in liberal soup land.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they deserve to die because they think they're...
You're not killing them.
So Stefan is throwing shade about the fact that the guy said he lives in a very liberal city. I think it was San Francisco, actually, something like that. And he's saying, who are you going to be saving? Putting your life at risk to go and save these people. Who are you saving? As a derisive statement towards the fact that it's mostly liberal people who live where this young man lives.
I know.
You're not
but
killing them. Are you going to go and risk your life To save a bunch of socialists who are going to hug their killers if they get half a chance.
Yes.
And good on this guy for that. Good on this guy for that. I may not agree with you politically, but I would try and save you if somebody's trying to kill you because you're an American. Oh, but just wait.
Why?
Because
don't you have any pride in your genes and your life and your future and your children?
Don't you have any pride in your genes? Is this supposed to say that he shouldn't have pride in his genes because he's trying to save people who disagree with him? Are your political views intrinsically tied to your genetic code? Because Molyneux likes to talk about things like the smarties, the smart people, being smart, being part of the smart group, he bases this idea of being smart on genetics. And so, if you have the right genetics, you'll be smart, and you'll think like him. You'll have the same political ideology as him. And if you don't, maybe you could infer that you don't have as good of genes and you're not as smart as him, and thus you're not worth saving if a terror attack happens.
They're Americans. And that's what you have to do as a real American, is you have to stand up.
You don't have to do it. And don't give me this word real like it's a philosophical argument. Make the case.
Look, it's as simple as the fact that without people who are willing to stand up to evil in our communities or around the world, we are not going to be a nation anymore. And
I get that, but can you stand up against evil when you're 6 foot under the ground?
And so this one actually confused me for a while. I was trying to figure out what exactly Stefan's trying to say in this. What I've gathered is this. If you stand up to evil and die, then you can't stand up to the other evil, which is the evil Stefan is trying to fight against? I mean, I'm trying to figure it out. This guy's saying he wants to stand up to evil by trying to defend people that are trying to kill Americans, and then Stefan saying, well, then you'll die and you can't stand up to evil. What? Does he mean that then you can't fight my political ideology battles with me or something? I don't know. I don't know. But it's such a strange thing to say, and it's almost oddly hypnotic, and that's something that he does a lot. This weird conflation in how he talks. It just, dude, it fucks with me.
The conflict is not you throwing yourself in front of some fat government worker who's going to bleed you dry of pension money all she can get. That's not the courage that's needed to fight evil. You don't have to block a bullet to fight evil.
No, but the courage
that's just
to
like
shoot
good
back.
guy dead.
Wow. Okay. I mean, look, if you don't like people, you don't agree with their policies, and you yourself don't want to be brave and try and save people just because you don't want to put yourself in harm's way, fine, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But if you're the kind of person who would examine somebody, look them up and down, and otherwise you would save them because you think they might think like you, but you won't because you think they might be your intellectual opponents, you're a prick. Wow. And I am starting to be thoroughly convinced. Stefan believes that if you die for a noble cause, as in protecting people who can't protect themselves, and then you are no longer available to help him push his ideology, his political perspective, he thinks that's a waste. He thinks that is not noble. Dude.
What you need to do is talk with people and confront people and speak truth to power. That's how you fight evil. It's not you taking a bullet for somebody who have you thrown in jail for following your own conscience, for God, some statist.
I've been trying.
I gotta reorient you. Gotta reorient you. Gotta reorient you. Gotta reorient you. The chilling reality is that you could seriously risk your life, get shot, get killed, get wounded, be put in a wheelchair for your life, get your balls shot off, be unable to bear children, to save a bunch of people who'll then vote to take away your guns. That's my issue. Or vote to increase your taxes.
It is more important to maintain your political ideology and to be a driving force for that than to defend defenseless people from rampant, dangerous ideologies. Wow. To me, that means that the threat of a terrorist attack is less of a threat to Molyneux than Democrats?
You know, I get the big blob of goo in your brain called America, but America is not chock full of people like you anymore.
He means white people.
Yeah, I guess so. It didn't used to be this way. Shit, I remember when I was a kid, it wasn't this way.
Oh my God! And when in America in the 1950s and the 1960s, when it was still 99+% white.
See, I told you he meant white.
Kids could take guns to school for target practice at recess.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cared.
You know, those good old days when we kept out those filthy Italians and Hungarians and Jews.
You got to find your tribe. Now, if your tribe is not where you are, then you can try and help people elevate themselves to your tribe. But if they simply refuse, you got to find your tribe.
Now, keep in mind, Molyneux generally likes to say he's all about individuality and being anti-collectivism, but listen to him as he talks about tribe.
And like you, I will fight to the death for my tribe being people who think.
People who think, aka smart people, aka people who have the genetic propensity, because he believes it is majority based on genetics. People who are genetically similar to him. I mean...
But we're kind of scattered. And I try and put out as much energy as I can every time I do a show, trying to encourage people to join the tribe, join the thinkers, join the reasoners, join the empiricists, join the people who can put two cogent thoughts together and use it to overcome prior programming.
Yeah, no, Stefan Molyneux, I have no idea why you were ever under investigation for possibly trying to start a cult. I can't figure it out. Why would anybody ever think that?
But those who are exposed to philosophy and choose selfishness, who choose mysticism, who choose collectivism, who choose superstition.
See, he says he's not down with collectivism.
After being exposed to philosophy, before they're exposed to philosophy, they're in a state of nature. I get it, it's fine. After they've been exposed to philosophy, well, sorry. After you're exposed to philosophy, you're either with us or you're against us.
Yet somehow that's not a collectivist statement.
You may think there's a middle ground. I know there isn't. And don't risk your life for the enemy. Don't cross lines and say, I'd die for these Germans as a Brit. Right? You got to know who's in your tribe and who's against your tribe. And I was hoping, of course, at the beginning of this show, not this show, but this show as a whole, at the beginning of my sort of philosophy project of the last 30 years, where we just spread reason and evidence and everybody becomes part of the same tribe.
So his intention was that he was going to go and teach the masses the new way of thinking or something like that. I'm not really quite sure. But really, this is such a great little audio clip. I'm just going to play this audio clip for you and listen to how hypnotic his voice sounds. Just listen to this.
And I was hoping, of course, at the beginning of this show, not this show, but this show as a whole, at the beginning of my sort of philosophy project of the last 30 years, where we just spread reason and evidence and everybody becomes part of the same tribe. So figure out who is your tribe and fight to the death for your tribe. But give nothing to the enemy.
The enemy in this case being people who are politically opposite of me.
No succor to the enemy. Not a cup of water. Not a bowl of gruel. No, not shelter, not kind words, not conciliation, not forgiveness.
There is absolutely no metric by which Molyneux would give any charity to somebody who thinks politically opposite, to the point that he encourages this young man to forego any of his belief in pride of people that he might disagree with, but are still part of the same collective nationality, saying that you should not defend them and you should leave them to die in the face of extreme terror and ideologically driven murder. You should not give them anything. Don't defend them. No water, no gruel. Oh my God.
Because the only way at this point to increase the tribe of the thinking is to be merciless against the anti-thinkers.
Merciless to the anti-thinkers. Does that mean people who are genetically inferior to you, Stefan? All right, now that was quite a doozy. So let's switch gears a little bit as we start to wrap this up. Next, Molyneux is going to talk about species, because he believes that we are not all the same species. And we'll talk about why this is a problem.
Looking at human beings as one species is not biologically valid. We are a variety of subspecies.
Well, actually, no. That's not actually very accurate whatsoever. You see, species is part of the taxonomic classification for biological life. And usually, when we start talking about species, we're talking about things that can or cannot breed with each other. Things that can breed with each other are part of the same species. Things that cannot are generally considered not of the same species. The basic belief that human beings can be lumped into different subspecies is rooted largely in extremely racist history. For instance, at times when they would go to, say, places like Southern Africa, and they would capture somebody of an African tribe and put them on display in a zoo as, look, this subspecies. That this has become a hallmark of race realists and their talking points is even more damning evidence that largely what they're talking about is not rooted in objective and collectively accepted scientific methodology.
We are a variety of subspecies, politically, ethnically sometimes, definitely in terms of gender, in terms of IQ.
We are a different subspecies if we think of things differently in political ways, or male and female are now different subspecies. What? How in the fuck does anybody, and I really have to ask this, okay, maybe you're out there and you are a fan of Stefan Molyneux and you like some of the things that he says about, say, peaceful parenting, his basic ideas for narco-capitalism, however much he actually holds true to that in and of itself. But say you're a fan of him and you like some of this sort of thing. The simple fact that this guy just said that you're a different subspecies than your sister or your brother? What the fuck? I'm not taking this out of context. This is just him he's flat out trying to explain what speciation is to people on his fucking radio show, and he just said this.
We are a variety of subspecies, politically, ethnically sometimes, definitely in terms of gender, in terms of IQ.
I didn't make him say it.
In terms of culture, these produce physical brain differences that are very hard to remediate when you get older. And all of this requires that the IQ can be raised.
But you can raise your IQ. People do.
The IQ of a lot of these countries is 85. That is a full standard deviation below the IQ of Europe. A full standard deviation below the IQ of Europe.
Well, what parts of Europe, Stefan? What types of Europe are you talking about? Are you talking about all of Europe? Because I gotta tell you, man, there are some Eastern European countries that do not have a high IQ level. They just aren't. And it has nothing to do with their race or their geographic location. It has everything to do with the other environmental factors. The fact of the poor case of education, the rise in poverty, in crime. Perhaps they're more religiously inclined, and so they forego some other areas of logical critical thinking. It could be any number of different things. But just simply saying a standard deviation from Europe just makes you sound very disingenuous.
Now, if there's any genetic component to that, and I believe that there is, nobody knows for sure, it's just a belief.
No, it's not just a belief. It's not just a belief. It's an area of serious scientific study and debate with scientists who are in the field of this specific parameters. It is not something for some history buff, some philosopher to try and just have a belief about, and then to grossly misrepresent, to try and convince people to then turn away from trying to help their fellow man because of some sort of intelligent supremacism that has a drastic racial component based on a faulty understanding of genetics.
I mean, for God's sakes, can we learn from history for one time and recognize that just continuing to impose opposing groups in the same geographical area is like introducing two subspecies of the same species in the same geographical area, hunting the same food. One of them will generally try to wipe out the other sooner or later.
So basically, if you have anything but a homogenous, singular, racialized country, then it inevitably is just going to blossom into a race war and ultimately genocide, right? Well, that's kind of interesting. Hawaii has had many different cultures on it for a very long time, and there hasn't been any race war on Hawaii. Granted, there are some racial tensions, especially with the native Hawaiians, but so far, no race war. Huh. Oh, God. The basic argument boils down to this. Is there a genetic component to intelligence? Or at least, let's not say intelligence, because honestly, Stefan using IQ as a basis for intelligence, it's not accurate, it's not viable, it's a bullshit way of talking about it by somebody who does not understand the finer complexities of it. Don't try and equate IQ with intelligence. It doesn't work. You can't measure a person's possible brilliance in every measure by a simple score test. A singular number will dictate how well you will do in every aspect. It's ridiculous. Now, if you have a nuanced scoring system where I can show your aptitudes in certain things, sure, that's fine. That's totally cool. Not the same as an IQ test. The IQ test is designed specifically for one singular number, and that is your basic determining factor, and that's what people would work off from there. But, so again, is there a genetic component to it? Science overall says, yeah, probably. There's probably a little bit of a factor to it. How much is always up for debate. It really, really depends. And it's not that far of a stretch to say that if it is in some ways genetic, that it can be inherited from, children from their parents to the children, to the grandchildren, etc., etc., etc. But as well, we live in a vastly more global society now. We have races mixing constantly. These arbitrary distinctions of racial groups are disappearing. Quickly disappearing. Because if there's one thing you learn when you start studying genetics is that breeding people that have wildly divergent genetic code actually tends to help strengthen the species as a whole, because we are just all one species. So even if, to some degree, your IQ score can be based on your genetics, that point is largely going to be irrelevant sooner rather than later. And even then, we know people can improve their IQ scores. We know. We've seen it. We've tried it. We've tested it. It is known, Khaleesi, that this can be accomplished. So rather than like what Molyneux usually tries to convince people to do is to change society so we treat people based on racial perceptions differently because they're gonna have a lower IQ, which is an insanely racist fucking idea. Instead, the answer is to improve education, to improve these working skills, to improve places where it might be impoverished, which might raise crime and cause people to have less of an education, so they have less of a chance to raise their IQ scores or their working skills or their basic understanding to be a healthy, functioning human being. We help them do better. And we don't base it on race. We base it on, well, it looks like these people need help. But God forbid if Molyneux was in charge, well, it depends. Who did you vote for in the last election? Oh, you voted for them? No help for you. Not even a bowl of gruel. What the fuck? I get it. I understand. He talks like he's just saying some uncomfortable truths, but he's just trying to spit some reality at you, fam. He's just trying to change the world. Well, he's wrong. He's wrong from my perspective and from how I've seen these things framed. And the fact that he doesn't say all of these all in one episode, but he spaces them out, so you have to piece it all together to get an idea of what his actual ideology is, makes me think that he knows. He is fully cognizant and aware and is intentionally obfuscating his outright ideological platform so that it's easier to accept. Because if you'll accept him on one, you're much more likely to accept him on the next, and then the next, and then the next. And this is what cult of personalities do. They weave this dogmatic adherence to a belief. If at the end of the day this didn't convince you, it didn't convince you, and it's fine. That's okay. You don't have to believe what I believe. You don't have to see Stefan the way that I see. And maybe you still see that he has some value even if you agree with me. that's fine too. But for me, and the things that I've studied and my familiarity with these topics, I am aghast and I am dismayed. And I find Molyneux and people who absolutely have the strictest adherence to race realism to be intellectually dishonest. Because if you don't really truly understand the source material, if you can't look at it with an analytical eye and not have to automatically attribute politics to it, then you could talk about it all you want, but I'm not really going to respect it as much. This has to be talked about objectively. It has to be done with actual empiricism, not cherry-picked data. And we have to talk about it honestly and openly. And when we feel like I do, that somebody is misinterpreting it or misrepresenting it intentionally, then we should call it out. You're so pale on that camera too. Weasel. 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 Weasel?